So I think for most people, what international order is referring to is kind of a set of institutions that organize the way that states interact with one another, and often we can locate this in the particular institutions like the World Bank or the IMF or the World Trade Organization, where we see the more abstract ideas of the way states should interact with one another have a more kind of concrete manifestation in terms of how do states conduct trade, when conflicts arrive, how do we resolve disputes, those kinds of things. So my general sense is that China does not have, to the extent that we can speak about China having kind of a singular intention, China does not have a clear vision of saying we want to reshape the nature of international order. That said, China, I think, does want to advance its interests, and it does want to have greater influence over questions of voting rights within international organizations, right? That was one of the reasons why China founded the AIIB, was in order to kind of push back against the resistance within existing multinational financial institutions for the share of voting rights and control over policies, that China is looking to have kind of greater leeway. But that movement to advance interests is not necessarily the same thing as wanting to reshape international order as such. So the new developments with the Belt and Road Initiative have changed the way that we talk about China's relationship to international order quite substantially. Because I would say that in the 1990s, 2000s, even into the years quite close to the foundation of the notion of this idea of Belt and Road in 2013, China was seen as having been socialized into this pre-existing set of ways of conducting international affairs, that it had quite effectively adapted to economic expectations of trade liberalization in the period of reform and opening in the 1980s and 1990s, and that even though China had some kind of different attitudes about questions of sovereignty than European states, let's say, that overall China pretty much bought into the existing rules of the game, as it were. This now is starting to shift a little bit with questions of Belt and Road, but China itself, or leaders within the Chinese government, are quick to say that China does fully embrace the rules of the existing order and is not looking to disrupt kind of the fundamental structures that underpin the way that international affairs are organized. I think that in 2013, when Xi Jinping first unveiled this idea of the Belt and Road Initiative, he never could have imagined that it would actually be at the scale that it is today. And I think even today, we have no idea where it's necessarily going to go in the future. So in thinking about what came out of the forum, one thing that was quite striking was a shift in the narrative around debt sustainability. So this is something that has been coming up a lot in conversations about BRI projects, is whether or not there is some element of debt trap diplomacy that China is pursuing here, of building or signing contracts with states in the global south that are completely unsustainable and have terms that if the country defaults on its loans, then China will gain a lease over territory or other kinds of rights. And what we saw at the forum, I think, is that China has heard some of those critiques, and that it is aware that this is something that other countries are very skeptical of, and that it is at least willing to talk the talk of the importance of debt sustainability and recognizes that for BRI to succeed, it needs to be accepted by the international community and other states that are part of BRI. And this also kind of gets at your previous comment regarding agency for the United States or European actors who kind of want to push back against, the BRI to some extent. If you look at the recent case with a deepwater port with Myanmar, that the United States had sent some advisors to Myanmar to help renegotiate the terms of that agreement and reduce the debt burden about 60%, which I think speaks to the way that actually there is quite a lot of room for potential negotiation there, and that it doesn't necessarily have to be such an overwhelming prospect of China just singularly imposing some vision of the world of China at the top of the hierarchy, and all other states have to just submit. The question of China talking the talk is something that actually other actors need to be kind of vigilant about, and that when it comes to the kind of spread of authoritarian values, that there is actually a lot of scrutiny that the West needs to bring towards itself on some of these questions of that some cases of censorship or kind of adopting a certain stance towards what will potentially please or displease Beijing, that we often see Western corporations taking kind of a proactively pro-Beijing attitude when they haven't necessarily been pushed to do that, and that there is, I think, more opportunity for pushback, but the notion of just acceding to, well, China is a very powerful state, and we know what its preferences are, and therefore we're going to try and accommodate what those preferences are proactively, is something that we actually have seen, and that we need to be more vigilant about in the future.